many actions that are good to try to change these acts that aren't good and are having bad effects. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about living lightly on the earth, which is a movement that's been going on since the 80s of people who have been trying to work on limiting carbon emissions and limiting waste. And when I started to look up the positive things, I was amazed, and I really had to edit it because there wasn't enough space. So it is wonderful to see that there are also karmic effects that are very positive that are going on now in the world. And the ozone layer is healing due to world efforts to limit ozone-depleting substances of hydrofluorocarbons, and it might be completely healed by 2060. 2018 was a record year of renewable energy investment in bioenergy, solar, wind, and hydro projects. And the International Energy Agency reports that by 2023, 40% of world energy consumption growth will be in renewables. And in 2023, 1/3 of the world electricity will be in renewables. And it was wonderful to see that in 2018, 78% of Germany's electricity came from renewables. There are national laws that are coming out now in different countries to ban single-use plastic pollution, like buying one bottle of water and throwing it away. And single-use became the word of the year in 2018 because it was used so much. Collins Dictionary said it was the word of the year. So people and many agencies are trying to make changes. Veganism, which is a plant-based food diet, has gone up 600% in the United States between 2014 and 2017, and up 350% in the last decade in the UK. It's considered a food trend, but it also might be a transformation in people's eating habits and the way that they use the earth and animals. And there's a great revival in locally produced food, more than doubled between 1917 and 2007 in the US, and organic produce goes up 20% annually, and it's been doing that since 1990. And many countries in Europe ban GMOs. 67 countries in the world insist on labeling of GMOs. Something really lovely was the young students in high schools that were striking last year. It was started in September by Greta Thunberg, a Swedish girl who wouldn't go to school because she wanted climate action. And she ended up speaking to the UN. And if you looked at her speech to the UN in December of 2018, so just a month ago, in Poland, it is a speech about karma. She speaks about the effects that the generations before her have had on the earth, and she asks that changes be made. It's really very beautiful. And after she did that, many students in many countries started to strike. And there's a return to better public transport systems. And we can see that here in Turkey, and I see it in Athens where I live also. Much easier not to use a car, more and more. And the last is just here in Turkey, where we have to buy our plastic bags now, finally. And that's going to mean that we're going to use a lot less plastic bags. And in 2018 in Australia, they banned plastic bags. And they saved 1.5 billion plastic bags in 1 year. So with our larger population, we're going to save a lot of plastic bags. So there are good and wonderful things moving along. And so sort of like the Dhammapada, we've got the negative and we've got the positive. And there's a word that's used for going down the right way and stopping these actions that are based on craving and need and also on ignorance, really. And that's called burning karma. And it's very interesting because you burn karma. And when you do that, when you choose not to go down that craving route, when you choose not to take that route, every time that we do it, we burn that just a bit. And I really like that because it's like the impurities in the silver. You take out some of those impurities every time you don't go down there. Every time you burn some of that karma until it's gone. So there is a lot of hope there. Now I'd like to move to the third part of the talk and speak about the Buddha and how he became trackless. So he was a prince in an aristocratic family that ruled the Shakya kingdom, and he knew all about sensual pleasure and personal gratification, and it wasn't enough for him. And at the age of 29, he left his home and he went out onto the road and wanted to learn. He became a searcher. He wanted to find a way to the deathless state, to the state of not having to repeat always and always this cycle of birth and rebirth and the suffering of human beings. And he wanted to find this other state of nirvana or enlightenment. So he tried many things, and in the end he was attempting a very severe form of asceticism, like a self-mortification. He wasn't eating with a group of people in the forest, searchers for spiritual development, but they were not eating, they weren't breathing, they were really hurting themselves. And he realized that if he continued doing that, he would die. So he was looking for another way, and he remembered when he was a little boy, and his family put him underneath a rose apple tree, and he was watching his father, who was the king, but still plowing the land. He was watching his father plowing the land, and he felt this great happiness and openness and connection with something bigger. He felt a different state of being, and it was his first real spiritual sense. And he thought, I think I could go down that way of higher mental states. I could try this as a way. And this was the middle way that he decided on. The middle way between being wealthy and sensually full of anything you wanted, self-gratification, and also the other way of hurting yourself with self-mortification. So he decided to take this way and to try it. And he walked through a plain of grasses. And he still had tracks because he was trying to find this other state, but he still was in the conditional world. And he walked and he walked, and he went to the Narjuna River, and there was a peepal tree there that later was called the Bodhi tree because he was enlightened there. And it was also called, in Latin terms, ficus religiosa, because that's where he had his enlightenment. Anyway, he sat under that tree, and he said something when he sat under the tree. He is said to have said, "Flesh may wither, blood may dry up, but I will not stir from this spot until enlightenment is realized." He was hugely dedicated. This was something he was going to do. He was going to find enlightenment and use this new path of higher mental states to try to find this way. And it was the springtime, and it was a full moon, and he sat under the tree, and he started to move into these higher mental states. And when he did, Mara appeared, and Mara is the evil one, the lord of sensual experience and the lord of death. And he's a mythological character in Buddhist mythology, but he also represents our own personal psychological fight within us, where we don't want to give up our habits and our ways. And so he represents an inside fight as well as a fight with a with a creature or mythological person outside, but a fight within. And so Mara comes, and he starts with bringing all his sons, and his sons are an army, and they shoot arrows at the Buddha who was sitting under the tree, and they throw fire at him, and they throw a whole mountain at him, and he just sits there, and the arrows turn to flowers, and the fire turns to sparkling rainbows, and nothing happens. He doesn't react with hate. He doesn't react with hatred and aggression. He just stays there. So then Mara brings out his sexy daughters. He's got a lot of gorgeous daughters. And he brings them out in their dancing gear, and they try to tempt the Buddha. But he doesn't bat an eyelash. He's not interested in that. So it doesn't work. And then, as Vajrachaksa really loves to say, Mara brought out his lawyers, because Mara started to try to influence the Buddha mentally. And he started to say, well, who are you that thinks you're just a kid of 35? Why do you think you could be the Buddha? I'm centuries old. I'm the one that should take this place of the Buddha. And look at you, you didn't even manage to stay being an aesthetic in the forest. You left it. You were too weak to even continue. How do you think that you can do this? And Mara's sons all stand up for him. Mara says, I'm the one that should be the Buddha. And Mara's sons all start screaming, yes, Mara, we witness for Mara, just like a political party. We witness for Mara, he's going to be the enlightened one. And the Buddha doesn't move. He just puts his hand on the ground and he says, the earth will represent me, will witness me and my efforts. And out of the earth comes the earth mother goddess, and she comes out to her waist. And she says, yes, I've seen the Buddha over countless lifetimes, over thousands of lifetimes. And I've seen him practice the paramitas, the 6 perfections, for centuries and centuries. And he is the one who deserves to be the Buddha. And I'll read you what these 6 paramitas are. They're generosity, practicing ethics, patience, energy in pursuit of the good, meditation, and wisdom. So for countless lifetimes, the Buddha tried to do this and develop himself. And he came to the state where he had done that, and he could lift off from the conditional ways of being. So Mara scuttles off and sits in the dust somewhere with a stick, playing with a stick actually. And the Buddha goes on that night to meditate and go farther and farther into higher mental states. Some people say it was one night, and some Buddhist sects say it was 7 days. But in that time, he began to see reality. He saw the truth, and he left conditions. He saw his own illusions, and he saw his own lifetimes, one after another. And he became free of them. The basis of his teachings all came in those that night or nights of strong meditation. And he was said to be a really very kind teacher and a very loving person. And one of the stories that I think shows a lot about, he went on after he got up from that tree, he went on to teach for 45 years. And while he was that teacher, he affected many people and brought huge change. And one story, the story of the mustard seed, shows how he helped a woman to see her track of illusion. And that story is about a woman whose baby had died, and she was full of grief. And she was carrying her dead baby. She wouldn't let the baby go. And she went to the Buddha and she said, I know that you have huge powers. You have amazing magic powers, and you can bring my baby back to life. Bring my baby back to life, please. And he said, well, I will do that, but you need to do one thing. I will do it if you can bring me a mustard seed from a house with no death. And she said, oh yes, okay. And she ran off, and she went to all the houses in the village and all the houses in the villages around, and she couldn't find a house that didn't have painful stories of death and suffering. And she realized it was everywhere, and it wasn't just her and her baby, but it was the condition of life. And the Buddha actually says that the condition of birth is death. If you're born, you will die. That's the condition. There's nothing else that we know would happen to us except for that death is there. So she realized it, and she realized that it was a track of grief that she was holding on to. And she left it, and she came to the Buddha and became one of his disciples. So I think that he was very compassionate in his way of letting people see what they were stuck in this life of conditions. And there's another story that I want to bring up because I think it shows how it must have been for him in a way, how free he was from all of these conditions and reactions and reactivities that the people around him had. And that's the story of Akosaka, the Brahmin who comes to the Buddha. The Buddha's in the squirrel sanctuary of the bamboo grove, and Akosaka comes there, and he's furious with the Buddha because he's learned that one of the members of his Brahmin clan became a Buddhist and went to refuge with the Buddha and left his Brahmin clan. And he's furious, and he's blaming the Buddha and insulting him and screaming at him. And the Buddha just waits calmly while he goes on with his talk. And then he says to Akosaka, do you have relatives and friends and important people that come to visit you in your home? And the Brahmin said, well, yes, of course I do. And the Buddha says, and when they come, do you give them food and drink to eat when they come to your home? And the Brahmin said, yes, of course I do. And the Buddha said, if the people don't eat and drink of your food and they leave it, whose food and drink is it? Does it belong to the people or is it yours? And the Brahmin said, well, of course it's mine. And the Buddha said, well, that's the same as it is with your words. I give them back to you. They're yours. They have nothing to do with me. They're yours. And I think that shows so much that it just slipped off him. He wasn't part of all that. It wasn't his. He wasn't reacting. It wasn't his world of blame and trying to prove anything. There's a Sangharakshita in his seminars about the trackless verses sort of explains what it would be like if the Buddha walks in to a room where people are all having problems, and how much he wouldn't be part of it. So Sangharakshita writes, in a confused, turbulent situation, perhaps involving a number of people, if another person comes into that situation from the outside, very often they'll make things worse, even if they're trying to help, because of the presence of craving in us. We are likely to make the situation worse for ourselves and for others. But the Buddha doesn't do that, because there is no craving, no thirst, no tanha in him. He will clarify the situation, make it better and better. So he's just not part of it. And the nice thing is that he really affected Akosaka. And Akosaka said, oh, you've turned things upside down. You're magnificent. And he became one of his followers. And I think that turning things upside down is really a good description because that's what the Dhammapada does so much. It says, oh, these things that you think are good, well, they're not good. And these things that you think are not good, well, they're good. And I think that it really underlines this radical quality that Buddhism has of going so much against the major views of a culture because it goes against the craving and the continual building up of karma and actions that we do. So the Buddha loved to be in the forest, and he used to go off and leave his followers sometimes and go to his special places, and they'd have to go and find him. That's written in Vishvapani's book, biography of him. And I think I can really understand why he would have done that. He just needed to get away from all of this, reactivity and amongst his monks, amongst villagers, and he would go off and be in the forest by himself. And he really loved that. He was very strong, and until he was 80 years old, he died at 80, but that was because of food poisoning, not because of his own health. And he used to live sometimes up on Vulture's Peak, which was miles up a very, very steep track. And every day he'd come down and beg for food and go back up. He loved being in the wild and living a wild life. So I've got a tiny little verse about that. Delightful are the forests where ordinary people find no pleasure. Those who are free from passion delight in them, for they do not go in quest of sensuous enjoyment. All right, so now let's end with some qualities that I kind of pulled out. And these qualities all come from the Dhammapada, interestingly enough. Qualities that might help us to be a bit more free, to move a little bit more freely, and free ourselves from tracks and conditioned cravings. So the first is to question ourselves all the time, and that's what the book does. It questions all the time and puts forward what are you doing? Is that really? What does that mean? Is that really acting freely, or are you just acting out of habit? And Vajrachaksa is really good at that. He often points those things out to me, just delicately, just gently. And I realize I always react like, no, it's, of course I'm fine. But then later I think, oh yeah, there is a point there. And also, dwell, secondly, that's first, question ourselves. Secondly, dwell on the positive, the good, the beautiful, and the skillful ways of being and living. The Buddha said, whatever a monk dwells on and keeps thinking about becomes the inclination of his awareness. So our minds are affected by what we dwell on and think about. So we need to support ourselves and be positive about the victories that we have in our own lives and that we see around us, and also to dwell on the positive and beautiful around us. Thirdly, tranquility and relaxation. That's brought up in the Dhammapada over and over again. I haven't actually read a verse of it, but they speak of it all the time, the tranquil life. And it's not like something, and I need to remind myself of it all the time. It's not something we do on a holiday or on Sunday. It's the life. The life is a tranquil and relaxed life. And there's no going farther unless one is relaxed and tranquil. And then fourthly, which seems like it might be opposite to that, is discipline. And that's because we need focus. We need a lot of focus, a mind that is in control to be able to move up into higher mental states and to be able to go farther with meditation and with just the way we live our lives. And fifthly, to be harmless. Harmless is a description that the Dhammapada uses a lot for wise people, and I really like that. Harmless. And that is really basically ethical living, to not hurt anything else, to be harmless, and to live in an ethical way. And when one lives ethically, then there's no conflict that holds you down. There's an ability to be freer. And lastly, living in the moment. And I think that that urgency of the Dhammapada, of doing it now, is about doing it in the moment. Do it now, don't wait, do it. But the moment is also something, I was kind of playing with it a little bit today before I came to this talk when I had some time, and just letting myself be there and let the moment take me. And I felt this groundedness that I'm always saying I need to work on groundedness. And I think that groundedness is a lot about being present in the moment, where everything has a steadiness, everything has its being and solidity around you. Every object kind of glows and sparkles when you give it the chance to just be there around you. And then you can live from moment to moment and just let this world be as it is around us. And it's not only beauty and a feeling of groundedness, it's also the place where we can change, because it's in that moment between all these ups and downs that the change happens. It doesn't happen in the future. So transformation and change happens in the moment. And when it doesn't happen now and it doesn't work, there's always another moment, because the moments are always there. And they're always there for change and freedom. So I'm going to end with two more verses from the Dhammapada that are not the same ones, but they're also about being trackless. There is no track in the sky. There is no true aesthetic outside this teaching. There are no conditioned things that are eternal. There is no vacillation in the enlightened ones. There's no going back and forth in the enlightened ones. There is no track in the sky. There is no true aesthetic outside this teaching. The race of men delight in illusion. The enlightened ones are free from illusions. So that's it. I told you I would. I cut out quite